Revelations.Unveiled.Detroit.
Exonerated, guilty until proven innocent. The unequal American justice system. Anthony Broadwater is cleared of Alice Sebold's rape 40 years later. Syracuse, New York. Anthony Broadwater collapsed on his lawyer's shoulders, sobbing as a Syracuse judge exonerated him last week of the 1981 rape of Alice Sebold, now a best-selling author who started her career with a memoir, Lucky, about her ordeal. The story was broke and presented as a state Supreme Court Justice Gordon Cuffey presided over the extraordinary drama in a Syracuse courtroom 4 days before Thanksgiving. It features Broadwater, his lawyers David Hammond and Melissa Schwartz, Judge Cuffey, and Syracuse District Attorney William Fitzpatrick, who joined in the request to exonerate Broadwater 40 years after the crime. In the days after the court hearing, Broadwater's exoneration has become international news. The extraordinary reversal of a rape conviction at the center of one of America's foremost memoirs by a rape victim. Articles on the case and photos have appeared from Russia to Australia. The story has reverberated across social media too, with some criticizing Sebold for her role in the wrongful conviction and others defending her as an unquestionable victim of rape. Broadwater, as prosecutors conceded in 1981 and now, was convicted at trial solely on Sebold's identification of him at trial after picking a different man out of an earlier police lineup, and a reliance on microscopic hair analysis, which was decades later deemed junk science by the FBI. The November 22nd hearing happened after a producer, Timothy Mercusciante, hired to make a movie out of Sebold's Lucky, left the film production and hired a Syracuse private investigator, Dan Myers, to track down Broadwater, now a 61-year-old man struggling to make ends meet as a convicted felon and registered sex offender. Myers brought Broadwater's case to Syracuse defense lawyers David Hammond and Melissa Schwartz, who successfully lobbied Fitzpatrick, the current DA, to re-examine the long-ago conviction. Knowing the hair analysis constituted junk science, the DA was also swayed by Sebold's mistaken identification at a police lineup before Broadwater's trial. At the court appearance last week, Fitzpatrick said Broadwater should have been released as soon as Sebold picked the wrong man out of the lineup. Fitzpatrick last week said Broadwater had to suffer because of a conviction that never should have happened. At the rape trial, Sebold identified Broadwater as the rapist, but he was the only black man in the courtroom. Decades ago, DNA samples from the Sebold's rape case were destroyed. long before the advent of modern DNA technology, leaving little chance now to track down the actual rapist. 8 days after Broadwater's exoneration, Seabold broke her silence by self-publishing an apology in which she calls him an innocent man.
Anthony Broadwater had hoped and prayed for this moment for 40 years.
Representations of counsel. This court grants the defendant's motion. Maintain his conviction.
Syracuse Judge Gordon Cuffey overturned the rape conviction that had put Broadwater in prison for 16 years and marked him as a sex offender for most of his life. Broadwater had always maintained his innocence, but he went to prison after a rape victim pointed him out in a courtroom in 1982. That victim was 18-year-old Alice Seabold, a freshman at Syracuse University. In 1981, she was raped while walking home from a friend's house through Thorndon Park. After telling police she saw her attacker on Marshall Street weeks later, she was asked to pick him out of a lineup. This is Anthony Broadwater, but instead she picked this man. Even after that, Broadwater remained a suspect in the case.
You picked out number 5, Mr. Broadwater should have been released, and the investigation should have started anew.
Months later in court, Seabold was asked to identify her attacker. She looked across the courtroom and picked Anthony Broadwater. That was a moment he remembers too.
I didn't know that my fate was sealed.
The evidence that sent Broadwater to prison was Seabold's identification of him in court and a forensic case built on microscopic hair analysis, evidence that is now considered junk science by the FBI. Seabold wrote about the traumatic experience in her novel Lucky, which sold over 1 million copies. Broadwater was convicted of first-degree rape and endured more than 16 years in prison. But Broadwater never stopped fighting for his innocence. He had to scrape by since his release from prison in 1999, working odd jobs, burdened by the reputation of a convicted rapist. He stayed a registered sex offender for nearly 40 years.
These are things that he will never get back. Anyone who took the time to look objectively at the facts, to look a little deeper into what actually happened, you quickly come to the conclusion that this was wrong.
I'm not going to, sully these proceedings by saying I'm sorry. That doesn't cut it. This should never have happened.
Injustice can happen to anybody. You just got to be so tenacious to fight it. You got to have perseverance, and you got to always never give up.
Still, Broadwater says he feels sympathy for Alice Seabold.
Something did happen, but I wasn't the person. If she had doubt, she should have came forward and said, hey, it wasn't this man.
8 days after Broadwater was exonerated, Seabold apologized to him publicly, saying, I will continue to struggle with the role that I unwittingly played within a system that sent an innocent man to jail.
Exonerated, guilty until proven innocent. The unequal American justice system. Revelations.Unveiled.Detroit.